It was just past noon when I saw smoke curling out of the chimney. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. The mountain air was so still you could almost hear your heartbeat, yet there it was, thin gray smoke rising from a place that was supposed to be empty. My house. The one I'd bought 3 months ago. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped closer, half expecting the wind to play some cruel trick. But then I heard it, laughter. A man's voice, light and casual, drifting from the backyard. Someone was grilling back there. The smell of meat hit me before I even reached the porch. I froze. The lock on the front door gleamed like it had just been installed, not the rusted brass handle I remembered from the listing photos. A fresh wreath hung neatly where the paint used to peel. My fingers brushed against the key in my pocket, but something inside told me not to use it yet. "Hello," I called out, rounding the side path. That's when the world tilted. 2 strangers were lounging by a crystal-clear pool that hadn't existed in any photo I'd seen. A golden retriever bounded toward me like we'd been friends forever. The man at the grill, mid-20s, backwards cap, paused mid-flip, spatula still in hand. And beside him, a woman in a pink athletic jacket turned, her frozen drink half-tilted. She didn't look confused, she looked offended. "Excuse me," she snapped. "This is private property." Her tone had that polished sharpness only people with power use, the kind that cuts before you even react. I think there's been a mistake," I managed. "I'm James, I just bought this house." She laughed, loud, dismissive, confident. "That's impossible. I manage this property under the HOA. You need to leave now." "HOA?" I blinked. "No, ma'am, this isn't HOA property. I closed on it myself. Got the deed right here." I pulled out the folder from my backpack, the same one I'd proudly carried out of my realtor's office weeks ago. She barely glanced at it. "Those papers mean nothing until verified. Kevin, call the sheriff." The guy at the grill lowered his eyes, hesitant, like he'd done this before. The dog barked twice. The woman, Carol, as I'd later learn, folded her arms and tilted her head just so, the sun glinting off her designer sunglasses. In that moment, I wasn't a homeowner. I was an intruder in what looked like someone else's paradise. I'd worked 80-hour weeks to escape a city life that drained me. I'd bought this mountain house to rebuild something of my own. Now this stranger stood there, acting like she owned it. "Look, I don't want trouble," I said, trying to steady my voice. "But I have every legal right to be here." Her lips curled into a thin smile. "Then you'll have no problem proving that in court. Until then, you're trespassing." Behind her, the pool shimmered, the grill hissed, and my dream cracked apart. I wanted to argue, to shout, but something about her calm confidence chilled me more than anger ever could. There was paperwork stacked just inside the sliding door, like she'd been waiting for this confrontation. Everything about the scene felt rehearsed. I muttered, "This isn't over," and turned back toward my truck. She called out, "Good. Then use proper channels next time before barging onto private property." The gate creaked shut behind me. The laughter resumed, faint but cutting, as my boots kicked up dust on the gravel. For 3 silent hours down the winding mountain road, I replayed it all. Every word, every look. How did buying a house turn into being told to leave it? By the time city lights reappeared, my confusion had hardened into something else. Resolve. No one was going to take what I'd earned through clever paperwork and HOA bluffing. Not again. I'd already survived one battle over legal documents during my divorce. I knew what manipulation looked like, and I could smell it all over that woman's perfect smile. Whatever was happening at that house wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a game, and she'd just made her first move. And me. I was about to make mine. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's expression, confident, rehearsed, like she'd practiced that speech 100 times. "You're trespassing." The words looped until I finally gave up and turned on my laptop. The glow from the screen cut through the dark apartment as I typed Pine Ridge Estates HOA into the search bar. The first result looked clean, modern, far too professional for a rural mountain community. A smiling photo filled the header. Carol Stone, HOA president. the same woman who'd ordered me off my own land. Her bio described her as a community leader dedicated to maintaining high standards and property values. I scrolled down, pulse quickening. The site was full of cheerful slogans and strict rules: architectural uniformity, landscaping requirements, protective management authority. The last one made my stomach tighten. That phrase, protective management, was what she'd used at the house. I dug deeper, finding a downloadable PDF labeled HOA Charter Revision 2019. My coffee went cold as I read line after line granting the board the right to intervene and maintain any property deemed non-compliant or abandoned to preserve community integrity. It sounded reasonable at first, until you realized what it meant. They could literally take over a home if they decided it looked neglected. And my so-called fixer-upper, it had looked abandoned in the listing photos. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. She played the system. She found a clause vague enough to claim legal control, then moved right in. At 2:00 a.m., I called my realtor expecting voicemail. It rang twice. "James, it's late. What's going on?" "Why didn't you tell me about the HOA management clause?" I demanded. "The one that lets them occupy properties." A pause, then, "I thought those issues were resolved years ago." Her voice had lost that bright sales tone she used when I first bought the place. "What issues?" "James, look, I'm not a lawyer. The title came back clean. If there's a problem, your title insurance will cover it." I could hear papers rustling in the background, the sound of someone already done with the conversation. "You sold me a house with someone living in it," I said quietly, "and you knew there were issues." Silence, then a tired sigh. "You're not the first person to have trouble with that HOA. I'm sorry, that's all I can say." Click. By dawn, my apartment looked like a detective's office. Notes covered the counter, printouts scattered across the floor. I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was trying to understand how this woman had pulled it off so cleanly. I dug up old property records and county tax files. That's when another name appeared: David Chen, former homeowner. His mailing address was in Portland now. I stared at the date he sold his house, less than a year ago, right before Carol's HOA had assumed management. It couldn't be coincidence. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Carol wasn't enforcing HOA rules. She was using them to quietly seize homes. But I needed proof. That's how I ended up sitting across from Dan Scott, a property attorney whose office smelled like old books and stronger coffee. The man looked like he'd seen every kind of small-town corruption California could offer. He listened without interrupting as I laid everything out: the smoke, the pool, the fake authority, the polished website. When I finished, he didn't even look surprised. "I've seen this pattern before," he said, flipping through a folder. "Technically legal, morally rotten. People twist vague HOA bylaws to claim temporary management, then drag it out for years until owners give up." "So she's stealing houses?" I asked. Dan shook his head slowly. "Not exactly stealing, just keeping them long enough that it might as well be theft, and she's good at it." He pulled out a copy of another client's file, David Chen. The same name I'd found online. The paperwork looked identical to mine. Same font, same signatures, same legal jargon. "This woman," Dan said, tapping the page, "knows exactly how far she can push before breaking the law." I sat back, every ounce of anger turning cold. "Then we push back harder." Dan nodded once. "We will, but James, be ready. People like her don't just fold, they fight." Outside, the sun had dipped below the bay's fog line, turning the sky gray-blue. The reflection in the window made me look older, harder. Maybe I was. That night, I stared at the map on my wall, my mountain house circled in red ink. Somewhere in that quiet forest, a stranger was living the life I'd imagined for myself. And I intended to take it back. Whatever it took. Thursday afternoon, the sky over Pine Ridge looked like brushed steel, quiet, cold, waiting. Dan sat beside me in the truck, legal folder spread open across his lap, glasses perched low on his nose. His calm was unsettling. I was running on caffeine and anger while he looked like he was heading to a casual meeting. "Remember," he said, turning another page, "she'll try to bait you. Stay quiet. Let me do the talking. You're the homeowner. Don't look defensive." The road narrowed to gravel. Each crunch under the tires echoed like an approaching drumbeat. My palms were slick. Every turn of the wheel felt heavier. The house appeared through the trees exactly as I'd left it. Perfect. Too perfect. Fresh mulch around the flower beds, new paint glinting in the afternoon light, wind chimes dancing lazily by the porch. It looked peaceful, but my chest felt tight. Dan closed the folder and looked at me. "You ready?" "I've been ready since the day she told me to leave." We climbed out. The mountain air smelled of pine and tension. I hadn't even reached the porch when the front door swung open. Carol Stone stood framed in the doorway like she'd been expecting us. Not a hint of surprise on her face, just that same icy confidence. This time she wasn't in yoga clothes, a crisp navy blazer, neat hair, gold earrings, a costume for authority. Kevin hovered behind her again, his eyes darting between us. "Mrs. Stone," Dan said politely, handing her his card. "Dan Scott, attorney representing Mr. James Brown. We're here to discuss your claim of authority over this property." Carol didn't even glance at the card before handing it back. "There's nothing to discuss," she said. "This property is under HOA protection. Mr. Brown was already informed of that." Dan's tone never shifted. He was informed of nothing legitimate. The HOA's protective management clause doesn't grant you occupancy rights. The county recorder's office has no lien or management order on record. For the first time, Carol's expression flickered, just slightly, then she recovered. "Those documents were amended 2 years ago," she said smoothly. "Everything we've done here is fully compliant. I suggest you check your sources." Dan raised an eyebrow. "We did." The silence that followed felt like a coiled spring. Then Carol sighed dramatically and stepped aside. "Fine, come in. You'll see we've taken excellent care of the property, far better than the previous owner." The moment I crossed the threshold, I froze. It wasn't my house anymore. Gone was the rustic wood interior from the listing photos. Every inch gleamed with luxury. Polished stone countertops, new hardwood floors, art on the walls that probably cost more than my truck. The air smelled of lemon polish and expensive candles. "This is not caretaking," Dan murmured under his breath. "This is full-scale occupation." Carol motioned toward the living room, a space now filled with pristine white furniture. "As you can see," she said, her tone sharp and deliberate, "we've invested heavily to preserve this property's value. The HOA is within its rights to do so when a purchase is improperly executed." "Improperly," I repeated, my voice tighter than I intended. "I paid for this house. I have the deed." Carol turned her eyes on me like a teacher scolding a child. "Mr. Brown, your seller had no authority to transfer ownership under HOA law. I'm sorry, but your purchase was invalid." Dan opened his briefcase and laid out his own stack of documents. "Mrs. Stone, here's what's invalid. Your claim of seizure authority isn't supported by any clause in the HOA charter. And the so-called liens you've cited, they were never filed with the county, which means you're not protecting property, you're trespassing." Kevin shifted behind her, visibly uncomfortable. His hand twitched like he wanted to say something, but one look from Carol froze him in place. Carol's smile vanished. Her voice rose just enough to tremble. "You're making serious accusations, Mr. Scott." "They're not accusations," Dan said quietly. "They're facts. And if you continue to occupy this property, we'll be filing complaints with the district attorney's office for fraud and unlawful possession." Color drained from her face, but only for a heartbeat. Then she snapped back, chin high, mask restored. "I think we're done here. You can leave before I call the sheriff again." I couldn't hold back anymore. "You're living in my house, Carol. I don't care how many fake folders you stack by the door. You're not the law here." Her jaw tightened. "You city types never understand mountain communities," she hissed. "We take care of our own. You wouldn't last a week here without rules." Her voice was shaking now, not with fear but fury. "Get out." We turned for the door. Behind us, Kevin whispered something I couldn't catch before Carol barked, "Enough." Outside, Dan exhaled slowly, his calm finally cracking into something that looked like frustration. "She's dangerous," he said, "and she's ready to fight to the bitter end." "What do we do now?" I asked. He stared at the windshield for a long moment. "We build a case. You've been scammed, James, but not just you. She's done this before, I can feel it." As we pulled onto the gravel road, I glanced back one last time. Carol stood at the window, phone pressed to her ear, already scheming her next move. I realized then this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a war. And she'd just declared it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating nonstop. It was Dan, his voice was clipped urgent. "She's done this before, James. I've got the proof sitting right in front of me." I sat up, still half asleep. Proof of what? That she's running a system, an operation, not an accident. David Chen, the name ring a bell. I remembered the Portland address from the property files I dug up days earlier. Yeah, former owner of a Pine Ridge house. Dan exhaled. "Exactly, and the paperwork she used against him. Identical to yours, fonts, letterheads, fake HOA citations, even the timestamps on the supposed violation notices. She's been doing this for years, James, quietly, efficiently." I rubbed my eyes. So how did she get away with it? "She's not technically forging documents," he said. "She's exploiting gray zones in HOA law, drafting new rules that look legal, then using them to seize control of absentee homes. It's all smoke and mirrors. Legal enough to confuse cops, clean enough to scare off owners who can't afford the fight." The air in my apartment felt heavy, so she's not just pretending to be in charge. "No," Dan said, "she built a little empire out of it." Over the next few days, our work turned into obsession. My kitchen table became a war map, stacks of contracts, screenshots, emails, and records spread out like battle plans. I dug through social media, and that's when I found him. Kevin Stone. His accounts were wide open. Photos of new gadgets, fancy dinners, vacation snapshots, all posted from houses that didn't belong to him. Each check-in lined up with a property the HOA had managed. Each one a quiet theft disguised as order. It wasn't just paperwork. They were living inside people's dreams, rotating from home to home like ghosts with perfect alibis. When I showed Dan, he leaned over my laptop, whistling softly. "That's our digital trail, time-stamped evidence. The Sun, been documenting their crimes online." The next step was bringing in someone who could act on it. That's when Dan introduced me to Detective Lisa Green. She wasn't what I expected. Young, focused, with the kind of calm you only see in people who have already seen too much. We met in her small office at the county sheriff's department. A single fan word in the corner as she flipped through our files, one page at a time. She didn't say a word for nearly an hour. Then she looked up and said quietly, "You didn't just bring me a complaint. You brought me an operation." Her words hit like electricity. Lisa laid out the path forward. She'd open a quiet investigation, no sirens, no leaks. If Carol caught wind too soon, she'd shred everything before they could touch her. "You'll need to be patient," she warned. "But if this holds up, we're not talking about civil court, we're talking state-level fraud." For the first time, I felt something close to hope. Over the next week, Dan handled filings while I kept digging online. Every late-night click revealed another layer: fake HOA accounts, dummy companies with official-sounding names like Mountain Property Solutions and Pine Ridge Management Services. They looked professional but existed only on paper. Then came the breakthrough. Kevin had posted a photo of himself inside a luxury kitchen, captioned "Hard work pays off." The problem? The house belonged to an elderly woman named Martha Wilson, who'd moved to assisted living 18 months ago. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. I sent the screenshot to Dan. He didn't even hesitate. "That's probable cause," he said. "If the Stones are living there, we can connect this to a pattern of occupation and fraud across multiple properties." Detective Green agreed. "We'll dig into their finances," she said. "Follow the money and the whole structure falls apart." And it did. A week later, Dan called me from his office, excitement barely contained. They found it, James. Direct transfers from HOA accounts into Carol's personal bank. She's been skimming HOA fees to fund her lifestyle, renovations, vacations, everything. I couldn't speak. The weight of what we'd uncovered pressed down like a storm. She's not enforcing order, Dan continued. She's running a property theft ring. Every homeowner in Pine Ridge who didn't read the fine print is a potential victim. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city, the wind sharp against my face. I thought about the quiet mountain road, the sound of gravel under my boots, the laughter from my own backyard. Somewhere up there, she was probably sipping wine under those string lights, confident she still owned the game. But what she didn't know was that the game had changed. We weren't coming back with confusion and paperwork this time. We were coming back with law. And this time, she wouldn't see it coming. 3 days later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Dan's voice came through the line steady but charged. James, she's panicking. That's our first win. I was sitting in my car outside work, watching the fog roll in from the bay, when I heard him unfold the words that changed everything. Detective Green's team ran a quiet warrant through the court. They've traced deposits from HOA accounts straight into Carol's personal bank. It's all there. Dates, transfers, even memos matching those fake management fees. I sat there gripping the steering wheel. So it's over. Not even close, he said. She knows we're closing in. That's when people like her get dangerous. He was right. The next morning, I woke to a knock on my apartment door. A courier stood there, holding a thick certified envelope. Inside was a letter from a law firm in San Francisco. The words blurred for a second before I could even process them. Notice of intent to sue. Carol Stone was accusing me of harassment, trespass, and filing false police claims. The letter ordered me to retract all legal motions or face defamation charges. I laughed, but it came out hollow. She's flipping it, I muttered. She's making herself the victim. Dan's voice over the phone was calm but laced with frustration. Exactly what I expected. She's trying to scare you into backing down, but what she doesn't realize is she just gave Detective Green more ammunition. Only guilty people go on the offensive this fast. The next few days passed in slow motion. My phone buzzed constantly, calls from Dan, emails from the detective, new statements from witnesses. Each step pulled the mask off another piece of Carol's scheme. Then one gray Tuesday morning, everything shifted. James, Dan said, almost breathless, they found everything. Detective Green's team had executed a search warrant on Carol's home office while Kevin was out. Inside, they'd uncovered an entire filing system, drawers full of fabricated HOA notices, property folders, even hand-drawn charts mapping each acquisition. Carol hadn't just taken my house. She'd orchestrated takeovers of more than a dozen properties across 3 different mountain communities. Dan sent me a photo of one of the seized binders. The label read Acquisition Protocol. Inside were pages written in Carol's neat handwriting, target absentee owners, create violation documentation, establish management authority, occupy and renovate to legitimize ownership. I stared at that photo for a long time, every nerve in my body buzzing. This wasn't just fraud, it was strategy. Cold, methodical, heartless strategy. Detective Green's voice echoed in my mind when we met later that day. She studied you, James, she said. Your work hours, your divorce, even your travel schedule. You weren't random. You were a target. That revelation sat like ice in my stomach. She hadn't stumbled into my house. She'd chosen it, chosen me. But the deeper the investigation went, the more dangerous it became. Carol's lawyer doubled down, calling press conferences, claiming she was being persecuted by vindictive property owners and corrupt investigators. Then came her next move, a televised statement outside the courthouse. Standing in front of flashing cameras, wearing that same confident smile, she said, "This is a witch hunt. I've spent my life protecting this community, and I won't be bullied by outsiders trying to destroy it." Watching that clip on my phone made my blood boil. I wasn't some outsider. I was the homeowner she stole from. Yet somehow, she still had people believing her. Neighbors defended her online, claiming she was the reason Pine Ridge looked so beautiful. A few even accused me of trying to smear a dedicated community volunteer. But that illusion wouldn't last long. Detective Green's team traced funds from HOA accounts to a chain of personal purchases, renovations, vacations, luxury furniture, all funded by stolen money. And Kevin's open social media trail sealed the case. Every picture, every post, every location tag matched the timeline of homes Carol had managed. It was all there. When Dan called that night, his voice was different, steady, but with a hint of satisfaction. "It's over for her, James. They're going to arrest her soon. Detective Green says the district attorney's office is preparing multiple fraud charges." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was sitting in the dark, my laptop glowing faintly on the desk beside me, open to a photo of my mountain house at sunset, the same one that had started all this. I thought about the first time I saw it, about the smell of pine in the air, about how hope can turn into a nightmare before you even realize you're asleep. "She took a lot from me," I said quietly, "but she's about to lose everything." Dan's reply was simple, "Then we've done our job." But deep down, I knew it wasn't over, not yet. Because people like Carol Stone never go quietly. They go down fighting. And she wasn't finished with me yet. When the call finally came, I was parked outside a grocery store, halfway through a stale cup of coffee. Dan's name flashed on my screen. "She's done, James," he said. "Detective Green executed the warrant this morning. They found everything." For a moment, I couldn't even process it. Everything. Files, fake documents, forged HOA resolutions, 6 years worth of them. Even a handwritten journal. She called it her acquisition protocol. The phrase made my skin crawl. Dan went on, voice rising with disbelief. She laid out her whole playbook, how she picked her targets, how she used HOA language to make owners give up, how she'd occupy the houses to make it all look legitimate. I sat there staring out at the gray parking lot, watching people go about their normal lives while mine had become something out of a legal thriller. But this wasn't fiction. This was real. And she'd picked me like a mark on a list. Later that day, Detective Green called me in. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and toner. On the table were stacks of evidence bags, photos, ledgers, flash drives. "She kept notes on you, James," Green said, opening a folder. "Detailed ones. She knew your work hours, your financials, your divorce. She targeted homeowners who lived far away, who'd be too busy or too burned out to fight back." I couldn't speak. In another file, a name leapt out, Kevin Stone. Green continued, "He's more involved than we thought. Not just living in those properties, he helped her run the scam. Set up utilities, maintained appearances, even threatened owners who came back too soon." The words landed like a punch. I remembered that kid flipping burgers in my backyard, eyes full of quiet guilt. And now I understood why. He wasn't innocent, he was part of it. 2 days later, Carol and Kevin were both brought in for questioning. Carol's arrest happened inside her lawyer's office, classic timing by Detective Green to keep her from hiding evidence. Kevin's was quieter, he didn't resist, he just looked lost. Detective Green invited me to observe Kevin's interview from behind the glass. The room was small, sterile, humming with fluorescent light. Kevin sat across from her, hands trembling slightly, his face pale. "Kevin," she said evenly, "you're 24 years old, you've got a life ahead of you. But if you keep protecting your mother, you'll be facing federal conspiracy charges. Do you understand that?" He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. She slid a stack of papers in front of him, bank statements, emails, geotagged photos. "This is you, Kevin. We can prove you lived in homes that didn't belong to you. We can prove you took HOA money and helped forge documents." He swallowed hard, lips trembling. "It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone," he whispered. "Mom said these were just vacation houses, that we were improving them, helping." Detective Green stayed silent. Sometimes silence does more than shouting ever could. Kevin looked up, his composure breaking. She said we were protecting the community, that people like him. He paused, catching himself. Like James never cared about the neighborhood. The confession poured out like a dam breaking. He admitted to setting up fake accounts, forging repair invoices, even transferring $24,000 from HOA funds into his mother's account. He cried when he said it. She told me it was temporary, a loan, but every time someone pushed back, we needed more money to keep the scam alive. It never stopped. By the time he finished, his voice was a whisper. We took at least 15 homes, maybe more. She kept the list. The recording ended there. When the door opened and Detective Green stepped into the observation room, she looked tired but satisfied. "That's it," she said. "We've got him, and through him, we've got her." Within hours, Carol Stone was charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The woman who once lectured me about community standards was now being fingerprinted and photographed in an orange jumpsuit. Yet even as she was led into custody, she didn't look defeated. Her face was stone, cold, controlled. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps as she was escorted out. One shouted, "Mrs. Stone, any comment on the charges?" She turned her head just slightly and said, "This is all a misunderstanding." Even then, she clung to her script. But for the first time, the camera lights weren't hers to command. When the news broke that night, I watched the broadcast alone, sitting in the dim light of my apartment. My name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't need it to be. I knew. The fraudster who tried to erase my ownership, the woman who lived in my house and called me a trespasser, was finally behind bars. And as strange as it sounds, I didn't feel triumph. Just relief. And a quiet, exhausted peace that maybe, finally, this nightmare was ending. But I should have known better. Because in stories like this, the final twist always waits in the shadows. News of Carol Stone's arrest spread through Pine Ridge like a lightning strike. Within 24 hours, every homeowner, contractor, and local reporter had heard some version of the story, each one worse than the last. Neighbors who once nodded along with Carol's rules were now calling each other in disbelief. The woman they trusted, the one who fined people for mailbox colors and lectured about neighborhood integrity, had been running a criminal enterprise under their noses. When Detective Green invited me to the emergency HOA meeting that Saturday, I wasn't sure I wanted to go. Part of me wanted to forget that mountain road forever. But Dan insisted. "You deserve to stand in that room, James," he said. "You're the reason this whole thing came to light." The meeting was held in the local elementary school gym, folding chairs, humming fluorescent lights, the faint smell of floor wax. It looked more like a town hall after a storm than an HOA session. Reporters lined the back wall. A handful of residents whispered anxiously, clutching copies of the news article that had run that morning. HOA president charged in property theft ring. Detective Green stood at the front, next to a tall woman in a gray suit, Angela Torres, the county prosecutor. They didn't waste time. "Carol and Kevin Stone have been charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement," Torres began. "We have evidence of at least 18 properties targeted over the past 4 years." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Martha Wilson, the elderly woman whose home Kevin had occupied, raised her trembling hand. "How many of us lost our homes and didn't even know it?" she asked. Torres' answer was quiet but brutal. "Too many, some fought back, some didn't." Detective Green stepped forward. "If your property was ever under so-called management review, or you received unexplained HOA notices, please come speak with us after the meeting." I watched the room shift, from confusion to outrage, from loyalty to shame. People who had once defended Carol's tough love were now realizing they'd been paying HOA dues straight into her personal accounts. One man near the front, Robert Martinez, a longtime resident, stood up, his voice shaking. "We trusted her. She made us believe she was protecting us, and the whole time she was stealing from all of us." I felt Dan nudge my arm. "You should say something." My legs felt like lead as I walked to the front. For months, I'd been treated like an intruder. Now the same faces that once glared at me looked up with uneasy recognition. I took a slow breath. 6 months ago, I said, I thought I made the smartest purchase of my life. I bought a fixer-upper in the mountains, a quiet escape. But when I showed up, someone else was living in it. The room fell silent. She told me I was trespassing, that I didn't belong. I thought it was a mistake until I realized it was. It was a plan. Carol Stone didn't just steal my house. She stole peace from everyone who trusted her. I paused, looking across the crowd, at faces now lined with guilt, disbelief, even tears. She used your trust as her greatest weapon, and she almost got away with it because people assumed power meant truth. When I stepped back, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't loud. It was the kind that carried relief more than celebration. Then David Chen walked in. He'd flown down from Portland after hearing the news. When he spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. I thought I was alone, he said. I thought I was the only one who'd lost everything. She made us feel stupid, small, and isolated, but she was just a thief hiding behind paperwork. People wept quietly as he finished. Even Detective Green's usually steady face softened. By the end of the meeting, the community had voted unanimously to dissolve Carol's board, elect new members, and hire independent auditors to review every cent of HOA money. Transparency, oversight, accountability, words that hadn't meant anything there in years. Outside the school, cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed around me and Dan. I wasn't used to microphones in my face, but when one journalist asked, "What's next for you, Mr. Brown?" I finally smiled. I'm going to renovate my house, I said. The right way this time, and maybe help make sure this never happens to anyone else. That clip made the evening news, a small, quiet man who stood up against a powerful HOA president and exposed a statewide scam. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt free. But later that night, sitting on my apartment balcony, I realized something else. Justice wasn't just about getting my property back. It was about showing everyone who'd ever been bullied, threatened, or silenced by people like Carol Stone that they could fight back too. And win. It was late autumn by the time I finally drove back up the mountain. The air had changed, colder, sharper, carrying the scent of pine needles and the faint smoke of distant fireplaces. For the first time in nearly a year, I was heading back to my house. The gravel road crunched under my tires as I climbed toward the ridge. The trees, now a blur of gold and red, seemed to whisper in the wind. I half expected to see her standing there on the porch again, arms folded, telling me I didn't belong. But when I pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet. No cars, no laughter, just the sound of the forest reclaiming its calm. I stepped out slowly, boots sinking into the soft earth. The front door creaked open, that same long, tired groan I remembered from my first visit. Dust motes drifted through the sunlight as I walked inside. The walls were bare. The fancy furniture was gone, confiscated by investigators. It felt hollow, but it was mine. Every echo, every scuff mark, every dent in the wood floor was proof that the nightmare was over. For weeks after the trial, I hadn't come up here. I followed the case from a distance, reading updates in silence. Carol Stone had been sentenced to 12 years in state prison for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. Her son Kevin took a plea deal, 2 years probation and mandatory restitution. The day the verdict came down, the courtroom had been packed. Carol showed no emotion as the judge read the sentence. No tears, no apologies, just that same unflinching stare as if the rules she'd written for everyone else should have still protected her. But Kevin, he couldn't even lift his eyes. When the bailiff let him out, he looked back once toward me. And for the first time, I saw something honest there, regret. Weeks later, I got a letter from him, handwritten, no excuses, no lies. He wrote, "I know sorry doesn't mean much, but I was scared of her and I didn't know how to stop. You didn't just expose her, you saved me from becoming her." I didn't respond right away. Maybe I didn't know what to say, but one line stuck with me. Sometimes you don't realize how lost you are until someone forces you to see it. Standing there in the quiet of my reclaimed house, I finally understood what he meant. It wasn't just a home Carol had taken from me, it was peace, trust, the simple belief that the world could still be fair if you fought hard enough. And somehow, by the end of it all, I'd gotten that back. The renovations took months. Every weekend, I came up the mountain with a truck full of tools and paint. I stripped the walls, replaced the floors, rebuilt the porch railing she once stood behind like a queen guarding her castle. Neighbors stopped by sometimes, people who'd once believed her lies. They didn't know what to say at first. Then one by one they offered help, a truckload of lumber here, a few hours of sanding there. It wasn't just my house that was being rebuilt, it was the neighborhood. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I stood outside with Dan and Detective Green. The new porch lights cast a soft glow over the yard. "You really did it," Dan said quietly. "You turned a mess into something good." Detective Green smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how rare that is. Most people walk away after the fight over, but you stayed." I looked out at the trees, the wind stirring through the branches. I guess I had to see it through. We stood there in silence for a long time, listening to the night settle in, the kind of silence that feels earned. When they finally drove off, I stayed behind, sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the sky turn to silver. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The forest breathed again, steady and calm. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes justice doesn't come with cheers or parades. Sometimes it's just the quiet sound of your own door opening freely, no locks, no lies, no fear. And as the wind rustled through the pines, I realized something I hadn't before. It wasn't revenge that brought me peace. It was reclaiming the truth. The house wasn't just a home anymore. It was proof that no matter how deep someone buries the truth, it always finds its way back to the surface. And that's where my story finally ended, not with anger but with peace. Because sometimes, the real victory isn't winning back what's yours. It's knowing you never gave up fighting for it. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.